Hello, my name is Magenta with a J. I'm a drag performer based in Boston. And a couple years ago, I did a tutorial series for how to do a full makeup look, and I got a lot of feedback that people liked the brow cover part of it. So brow blocking is a key part of kind of resetting your face so you can do whatever the hell you want with it with makeup. So I thought I'd do a shorter video just focused on how to block your brows. Okay, so first things first, my face is freshly cleaned and all that. And the first step is probably optional, but if you have some rubbing alcohol, and this is 70%, not the 90-something percent, I suggest rubbing down your brows with it just to make sure they are crystal clean and there's no little junk in there. And that will help ensure that when you put in the glue, which is the next step, that you're not also trapping in any dirt or anything like that, and just get a smoother overall experience. One thing I also recommend having handy is a towel of some sort, but you can use that if you want to like dab down your brows after you put the alcohol in it, and I like to use it throughout the gluing down process just to help smooth things out and clean it up a little bit. Okay, now when we talk about gluing brows down, I like to use Elmer's purple disappearing glue. I use the little baby ones because I feel like I get a little bit more control over it. And you can get a pack of like 60 of these for, it ends up being like 20 cents each or something like that. So highly recommend. I go with the purple because then you can see when it's dried. And open her up and then just start putting that glue on those brows. This stage, this very first layer, is really just about getting as much glue on there as possible. So I'm not caring too much about the direction I'm going, other than I'm going back and forth, trying to get all those little brow hairs covered from every possible angle. Okay, now that I've got a good amount of glue on there, I'm gonna take one of these little brush thingies, this one is well used, and just pull up. So I am brushing upwards. Basically, we are trying to find a way to get those brows as flat and spread out as possible so that we can have a nice flat surface for the makeup later. And by doing this, you are just getting them all in the same direction, and it'll help a lot when it comes to adding those additional layers. Immediately following that, now that we've kind of gotten that first layer of glue on and flattened it out, I add another layer of glue right away without waiting for this to dry, because this will just help kind of reinforce the direction that you're putting the hair. And I don't know if you noticed, I'm so used to doing it, I didn't even tell you, is that I take the end of the glue stick and then I use sort of the sharper end of that brush and stab it a bit. So I'm not sure how well you can see here, but it ends up making the glue stick look a little kind of lumpy and hairy. And what that does is gets more glue onto your brows more quickly. Don't be afraid to use your fingers if you get some rogue glue going on there. Also, just make sure you're going all the way to each end of the brow. Sometimes a few hairs can stick out and be strays. All right, one thing you might notice at this point is I have like some glitty globs all around here. And now is a good time to clean those up a little bit. So I take that little rag type towel that I had, and I'm just putting a little bit of water on the towel itself. And I am gonna try to rub off the excess stuff that is not actually on the brow. But you wanna be careful not to screw up what you've already done here. All right, now there's another thing I do that may or may not gross you out, but I find it's just the simplest way to handle this, and that is use my own saliva. So part of the point of this is to flatten. In fact, that's pretty much the whole point. So one good way to do that, this glue is water soluble, is to use a wet finger and just kind of rub it down and try to get that glue flatter before it gets too dry. Literally licking my finger to try to flatten this out. And again, you don't want to be too aggressive because you don't want to completely wipe off the glue that you just put on. All right, so at this point, I feel pretty decent about it. We're doing a couple more layers after this, so I'll have more opportunities to make sure this is all flat and clean and all that. But for the next step, you are just taking a few minutes to let this dry a bit. All right, we are back. It's been a couple minutes of drying here, maybe 5. And now we're ready for round 2. So again, glue stick, pokey thing, and I'm poking it. Now, saliva comes into play again. You want the glue to kind of glide over on top of what you've already applied, and one way to make sure it doesn't just kind of rip off anything before is to make sure it's a little bit wet. So here comes that saliva, and I am now again going over the brow in that same direction as before. And hopefully you can start to see a bit how you are forming a flatter surface, and the texture of those hairs will eventually basically disappear. Now, if you have very light brows, this could be your final step before setting this and then moving on to makeup. Most people will need to do an additional layer. One other thing to note that a lot of people do, which I actually think is a bad idea and does not work for me, although perhaps it would work for you, is apply powder after every layer of glue. I think that just makes it too thick and oatmeal-y, and the whole point is to flatten it, so adding a whole bunch of powder every step, to me, just makes your brows bigger, which is not the goal. So again, I'm going to use my finger to just smooth this out a little bit, and again, I'm going in the direction of the hairs. So if as you're doing this you feel some lumpiness, that might be where you need to focus a bit more with the finger flattening. And much like in previous steps, bringing back that trusty towel to get some of the extreme excess off. So if I go in with the towel, I usually go back in with my finger afterwards. And I heavily emphasize smoothing the top part up into your forehead, because that is where, in my experience, you're most likely to see some lumpiness, or where the brow coverage becomes more visible in terms of like a line of glue versus skin. And we are going to wait another few minutes for this to dry a bit further. As I mentioned before, if you have light brows, you can skip the next step and just go right to the end. However, let's all go on this ride together through the third and final layer of glue in just a moment. All right, we're back. It's been a few more minutes of drying. As you can see, there's still a little bit of purple in there, so it's not 100% dry, but it doesn't have to be perfect. You just don't want it still kind of wet. So, one more time. We are doing our final layer of glue now. Same technique as before. Glue stick, pointy, brushy thing. Stab, 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 stab. Lick. Apply. One slight difference for this final layer, because you've done such a good job of flattening out the brow in the first few steps, is that you can start to apply a bit horizontally as opposed to just up and down. And the reason for that is, at this point, you probably have a little bit of texture still showing in between the hairs, and since they're all going up and down, you're better able to fill that in by going left to right. Now, I'm extra careful at this point. I just want to be very gentle about applying this glue. Part of why I do that stabby thing is because it allows me to get glue on there without having to press down quite so hard, which is what typically causes you to kind of mess up your previous work. And just like previous steps, I'm going to use trusty finger and saliva technique to continue to smooth this out. Just keep in mind, since this is your final layer, you really want to make sure it is smooth. So for this layer, I do like to take that towel just for the very ends of the brows, the outer ends, because what you don't want is for little rogue bits of glue to be stuck to your face around here, because then when you start applying makeup later, you will probably notice sort of a patchiness based on where glue was or wasn't. So you kind of want to avoid that just sitting there on your skin when it's not covering the brow. So at this point, you've got all your glue down, and the last step is going to be applying some setting powder to lock it in place and allow you to start applying makeup. However, once again, you want to let this dry a bit. I recommend not letting it dry completely. You still want a little bit of tackiness. That'll help with pushing in the powder and making sure you get one last take at flattening it out. And we are at the home stretch. I've let this dry for a few minutes. As you can see, it's still a little bit purple, so It's not entirely 100% dry, but that's perfect for our final step. So I am taking some Ben Nye Neutral Set. This is just a colorless setting powder. And the very first time I tried blocking my brows, I followed a tutorial and I didn't have setting powder, and I just used white eyeshadow, which, no, don't do that. So setting powder, if you don't have it, a neutral colorless one, you absolutely need to get it. It is one of the most important products you can have for drag makeup, and it's got a lot of uses. So I put a little bit of setting powder in this little bowl thing. I'm using my little puff, and I'm going to do a first pass of just sort of lightly applying some of the powder over the brow. I'm not really pressing too hard, I'm just trying to get some on there. I do that on both sides. And now getting a little more powder, I go back in, and this time I press, press, press. Kind of going in that slight upwards flattening direction. That matches how we were gluing down those brows. This step, some people, even after they do the pressing in with the puff, they even go back with a spoon, like the backside of a spoon, to press in further. I don't really think that that's necessary. Honestly, I'm pressing it so hard it's just almost painful. So I pressed in all that powder. I look like a freak right now. And unlike, you know, typical setting where you want to bake for a while, you don't really need to do that here. So I just immediately go back in and brush off the excess. And if you waited long enough, you shouldn't have any clumps of wet setting powder around the edges there. And now you have your brows blocked and covered. Everything from here on out is makeup, layering that on top of it. So, as you may notice, you can still see them. I am going to apply my foundation and my eye makeup and all that good stuff. I find that those layers of makeup are enough to cover any color that's bleeding through in the brows. Some people, particularly if you do a lighter makeup look, might want to go back in and do some color correction. So typically that's with like a red or orangish color where you apply that over where the brow is. And the color theory behind this being that that balances out the darker hair color so that when you apply makeup over that, it kind of zeroes it out to something that's more close to your skin tone. So you can totally do that if you want. I do find that the times that I typically try for that is when I'm doing something that's like an all white face, like super white, where it's a little more obvious when some hair color is bleeding through. The other thing I recommend, let this sit after you brush off the excess for just a minute before doing this, but use primer over it before applying makeup. So it'll seem kind of weird, like you're almost undoing what you just did with the powder, but trust me, you needed that powder layer to stick to the glue and kind of smooth it all out. So when you apply that primer over it before adding makeup, you are essentially giving yourself a slicker, smoother surface to apply makeup to. So I hope that was helpful. Do all those things that YouTube people do, such as like, follow, subscribe, share, comment, like again, I don't know. And let people know if you found this helpful. Maybe share it with them too. Thank you for watching.